Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Beth Schoenfeld. I teach English at the Western Galilee College in the north of Israel. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a course that I set up and that I've taught. It's called Cross Cultural Short Stories. And I want to explain a little bit about the course and the fact that you can set up a course like this very easily for your students. And I found that it was really, really good. The students all enjoyed it. I enjoyed teaching it, and I think it benefited everybody. So the first thing is the type of the course that I'm talking about. And it's a lecture and a discussion, meaning that I would give background information, discuss things, read things with them, and then have the students discuss the short story with everyone else. The course is built around 2 academic hours per week, which in Israel would be 2 academic credits. The prerequisite is basically that they have enough English at the B2, C1 levels according to the CEFR. The rationale for the course. Why would we be teaching a course like this? Well, the aim of the course is to introduce, interpret, and critique short stories that have been written in English from around the globe that describe the unique experience and background of the author in connection with his or her environment and worldview. The majority of short stories should be from the modern age, meaning somewhere from the 1950s to the present. And the cultural and historical background of the stories should be discussed, as well as the biographical elements of the author. There's no one way to correctly interpret fiction. It's all subjective, which means that each one of us will see the story differently, and that's okay. The premise of this course is to discuss what we find in these stories and learn a little bit more about the people and the world around us, including cultures, languages, histories, behavior patterns, etc. To understand how an active imagination helps us perceive truth, make value judgments, and deal with the complexities of life in creative ways. We want to understand how narratives allow us to escape the problems and responsibilities of our everyday lives, and to briefly participate in a world of experience that differs radically from our own. To understand how the short story serves as a social document, which gives us insight into the laws, customs, institutions, attitudes, and values of the age in which it was written or in which it was set. How to go about choosing the content. As I said a minute ago, with the title of this lecture, the course that I set up is called Cross Cultural Short Stories. I chose the content of the stories according to these parameters. And of course, you can change the parameters as you feel fit. 1, I chose short stories and not longer ones because they can be read in one sitting. 2, they were written in English and not translation, albeit there is a lot of good literature that has been translated well. It's chosen from a variety of countries globally in order to get a better effect of our human commonality, both positive and negative traits. 4, attempt to understand what the message of the story is or what the story is about from our own cultural perspectives and backgrounds. Let me just give you an example. One of the short stories that I taught is by Ha Jin, who is Chinese, but he writes in English. And the story is called The Bridegroom. And it's about homosexuality, and it is set in the Cultural Revolution of the 1970s in China. So that's our framework. And while we were discussing the story in class, there was a young Arabic-speaking Muslim woman who didn't want to discuss the story at all. And after class, when I asked her why she wasn't participating, In the general discussion, she said that her religion didn't recognize homosexuality and that she didn't feel comfortable discussing the issue in class. I let it pass, let it go. However, when the final exam, one of the questions that she chose to answer was specifically about this story and specifically about homosexuality. And she had a choice of the number of questions that she could choose. So obviously, culturally, there was something there that was speaking to her, and she just didn't feel comfortable in the general discussion. So I was really happy to see that she addressed this issue written on the exam. Okay, methodology. First thing that I usually discuss was a general explanation of what a short story is, its history, and its varieties. Most of the students that I taught in this course were not students of literature, and therefore the whole framework needed to be explained. The second thing that I discussed were the elements of a short story: character, setting, plot, point of view, theme, conflict, and plot structure. Again, these were not students of literature, and I felt that it was important to give them the scaffolding that they needed in order to understand how the course was going to be conducted. The third thing is that I would go into each story beginning by background and history of the author, history of the country, show maps of the country. Not all students are familiar geographically with where things are located physically in the world, and the surrounding areas of where the story was written in order to get a better geographical perspective. Then, the fourth step would be to read the story aloud to the class. The lecturer's English will probably be better than the students. And therefore, I think it's important to hear the vocabulary, hear the words pronounced properly and not just read. And I would make comments where necessary about certain things that were being stated in the story, the connection between the characters, the connections in the plot, the use of special devices, etc., as I would run across them in the short story itself. Then I would have a discussion of literary terms that are pertinent to each specific story. I would have the students write out answers to the questions that I have in the booklet that would follow each story. The questions will help them make sense of the elements, and this can be assigned as an assignment for the next lecture and a discussion, depending on how long the short story is and how long it would take you to read through it and have a general discussion in class. Some of the short stories can be read in one sitting, but they're long. And if a class is an hour and a half, I'm not sure that I was able to finish every short story in one class, and sometimes it took 2 or 3. Then I would use what I would call the text analysis rubric, which will help facilitate literary and cultural interpreting and understanding. And what do I mean by a rubric? Well, there are 5 aspects that I would think that are important to the text, and together they help you critically discuss the text content, purpose, and context. So the first thing that they need to deal with are the signs. For example, what is the content of the text? So we need to think holistically first. What does this text represent? What story does it tell? But we also need to think in terms of specifics. What are the elements of the text? Sorry. What pieces, symbols, images, words does the text include? What related elements or details might have been included but were left out? That's also something that we want to address. The structure. How is the text organized? How would you describe the order or organizing system that holds this text together? It might be chronological, large or small scale, cyclical, random, or maybe even something else. How would you describe the relationship between the elements of the text? What connections are emphasized? From what perspective do we view whatever is represented there? The third element would be intent. What was the intention of the creator or creators of this short story? In order to understand the intent, you need to know who created it and the author's situation and perspective. Who were they? Was the creation of this text prompted by some specific event or problem, or was it a matter of self-expression? The fourth element is use. How is the text used? Here too, we need to identify the users. Who was the original audience for the text? Why did they turn to this text for entertainment, information? How did they make use of the text? Did they carry it with them? Did they view it in a museum or a magazine? Did they use it as a tool for their work? And the last element would be memory. What do you bring? What does the reader bring to this text? What memories or ideas do you have about the content or situation of this short story? What information or feelings from your own experience influence the way you respond to the short story? What assumptions do you bring about this kind of short story, and how do you make sense of it? Something else that you need to take into consideration putting together a course like this are learning outputs. What are the students going to get from this course? So one thing would be increased confidence in speaking English. When I gave the courses, I usually kept the cap of the number of students at 15, which isn't a very big class, but it's big enough to hold a general discussion. If you've got a class of 30, it's going to be a problem because not everyone is going to feel comfortable to speak. And then therefore the interaction in the discussion is not going to be as good. So you need to think about the size of the course as well. How many students do you want? Because one of the learning outputs would be really increased confidence in speaking English. A second learning output would be improved writing skills in English, because they're answering the questions after each short story in a written form. So we want to look at the grammar. We want to look at academic usage of vocabulary. We want to look at sentence construction, essay construction, and how they are then able to put their thoughts down in writing. So that's going to be increased and improved. We want improved critical thinking skills. All of the ideas that I just discussed in the rubrics help them critically think about the story, interpret the information that they have there, and then develop their own skills as well. Speaking in a general discussion increases, improves all of these things. You hear one person talking and you can say, oh, wow, I didn't think about that. That's interesting. Or maybe I should think about that. So one person can definitely help another person understand better, and that helps our critical thinking skills. Another learning output would be contextualization of knowledge. One of the short stories that I included occurs in India. I know that we have people here from around the world. I'll talk about the different places that I touched globally, but one of them was an Indian author about something that happened in India. And then my students, Israeli students, very often travel to India. They like the benefits and the challenges of the different places and states in India. And so that gave them a lot to talk about because they could then bring in their own personal experiences from one specific country, in this case, India, and use those personal experiences to help make sense of the short story as a whole. So that, again, is helping us understand what's really going on there. Another learning output would be effective communication skills, how to talk properly, how to listen properly, how to formulate sentences and ideas spontaneously without having to think about it beforehand. And the last thing is a connection and a contribution to the individual worldview of each student. What do you think about the world, the big world out there? How can I take all of that information and minimize it while maximizing it? Minimizing it in the sense of bringing it to me as an individual person in the world, maximize it by looking at where I am in the global picture, because we could be one little person in one little state that has millions and billions of people, but yet we can make a difference. The last thing that I really want to talk about would be research possibilities. We had a pre and post course questionnaire about expectations. What did the student think about the course before anything ever happened? So I introduced myself to those students who did not know me. I gave this, I gave this pre-course questionnaire about expectations. Then at the end of the course, before the final exam, I gave a post-course questionnaire. And of course, I compared and I contrasted the pre and the post questionnaires to see what actually happened in the course in the minds of the students concerning their expectations. Second thing was the analysis of answers to the questions on the stories. How did the students write their answers? Were they really short answers of one sentence, or did they get into short answers of 3, 4, 5 sentences and a mini type of paragraph? Other research possibilities are out there. You just have to think about what you want to do with those research possibilities and how you can then use them to create an article of your own. So I don't know exactly how all of this is going to go, but if there's any questions, please feel free to present them. What I've given up until now is basically the rationale for the course and how I set up the course. So questions can be posted. Okay. So that's basically my lecture about cross-cultural short stories. I can definitely go on and continue to speak a little bit about the content of the course. So I don't see any questions, and I have a little bit of time left. So I'm just going to move and go into a discussion of the short story, what it is. Human beings love stories. They've always told stories. Most stories have been lost through time, and only a small number remain. The first stories were told orally, from one person to another, or one person telling the story to a group. This is called the oral tradition. At some point, telling a story became a profession, and a person would go from village to village, castle to castle, to tell stories. And these people were often called a storyteller, or a bard, or a minstrel, and sometimes they told their stories to the accompaniment of music. There were two broad categories of stories in the ancient era. The first was factual. These were the stories that were intended and accepted as being real, describing histories or narratives of battles, victories, journeys, happenings, etc. One example is the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer, which describes the Trojan War between the Greeks and the Trojans. How fictional it was, we don't know. How real it was, we don't know. But that's what has remained, and that's what we use. The second type of short story are fictional. These are the stories that were made up to instruct or to entertain the listener. For instance, the creation myths of tribal peoples and the various legends about national heroes that have evolved into what we consider today legends. There are a few different kinds of fictional stories. They're myths, and these are symbolic narratives that are presenting important tribal and religious beliefs about the working of an orderly, harmonious, and systematic universe. The earliest myths in the oral tradition of primitive people probably derived from the human impulse to create a rational context for events and phenomena that seem miraculous or sacred in everyday life. They are told to explain how the world was formed out of chaos. And these creation stories vary from culture to culture, but every culture has them. And they've been found to be similar in many ways. Claude Lévi-Strauss was a popular French anthropologist, and he was most well known for his development of structural anthropology and for his structural analysis of mythology. He was interested in explaining why myths from different cultures from around the world seem so similar. Here's an example of a creation myth of the Cherokee Indians from America. According to this story, the creator made 3 clay images of a man and baked them in an oven. In his haste to admire his handiwork, he took the first image out of the oven before it was fully baked and found that it was too pale. He waited a while and then removed the second image. It was just right, a reddish brown hue. He was so pleased with his work that he sat there and admired it, and completely forgetting about the third image. Finally, he smelled it burning. But by the time he could rescue it from the oven, it had already been burnt and came out completely black. And so here in the Cherokee Indian creation myth, we have white people, we have red-skinned people, and we have black-skinned people. So these were just 3 of the ways that they were able to discuss this creation. Another thing would be legends. And unlike myths, they refer to more immediate life and setting of a given society. And according to anthropologist Joseph Campbell, who is best known for his work in the fields of mythology and comparative religion, his best known book is called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, that he wrote in 1949. He discusses the myth of the hero's journey, and this is also a pattern that is found in many cultures. His 4-volume work called The Masks of God cover the world of mythology. The development of written stories begins with legends.
Thank you, ma'am. We hope that this session has provided you with valuable insights and networking opportunities, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye-bye.